Well, I think we've given people enough time to join us. Also want to thank you all for being flexible with us and handling our rescheduling so smoothly. We're excited to share what we learned at PASS. So with that, I'll turn it over to Randy.
All right. Yeah, we last week at this time we had no power and consequently no internet, so pretty hard to do a webinar. So appreciate everyone hanging in there. Yeah, those of you who joined us last year for this, not everyone gets to participate in the PASS summit. So we like to do a quick recap and just talk about some of the key things that we learned and just the experience, and very, very informal. So please ask questions and see and we'll talk about things. So this slide, we see this slide every month, sans the pumpkin pie. As you know, we are giving away a pie in this webinar. So that's our holiday logo, I guess, is our pumpkin pie SSG. But yeah, we're SSG. We've been doing this for about 12 years now. And we do, health checks, managed services, SQL Server only, right? We focus on the Microsoft Data Platform exclusively. So glad to have you all. In terms of, Summit, just to kind of, from my perspective, introduce the topic or for me, I've been going, I think my first Summit was May 2000, late 90s. Like I've been to almost all of them. And, we had this hiatus for 3 years where we had, virtual summits or, the whole thing with PASS as an organization, declared bankruptcy. And, so there was a lot of uncertainty, right? And Redgate stepped in. Redgate did an awesome job with the summit, I think, all things considered. Definitely, definitely there can be some feedback and things, but, for me, it was just awesome being in person, right? Because I've been involved in this community and going to these for so long that, there is, I have friends that I haven't seen that I normally would see between this event and other events that I'd see several times a year, right? That I haven't seen for a long time. So that was great. And then the hybrid thing was cool too, knowing that there were people who were able to participate who couldn't be there in person. It was just really neat. It was smaller as far as the on-site than it's been in many, many years. But that was I'm sure from a Redgate standpoint they would have liked it to be bigger. But from an attendee's perspective, it was a little bit more intimate, I guess, that way. I didn't, in the past there's been people that were at Summit that I never ran into. And I don't think that could have happened this year because it was just that much smaller. I think they said there was about 1,500 people on site, was the last that I heard. And of course, SQL Server 2022, right, was the big focus, was announced in the keynote, general availability. A lot of cool stuff to talk about, and we'll get into that. I'm sure you're more interested in the content than in hey, it was cool to meet our friends. But I wanted to start with Heather, and Heather, you can introduce yourself, but Heather is a longtime technology industry veteran, but came to us about 2 years ago, not having really worked in the data platform. She's our director of managed services, and really, went and did a SQL Server database development course, certificate course at the University of Washington, and is really getting into data. And attended Summit as a first timer this year. So I imagine we have attendees who've never gone, and maybe you can use this to help your manager get permission. But Heather, maybe just tell us a little bit about your experience as the first time attending this conference, or really a data conference at all.
Sure. Well, actually, it's the first time I've ever attended a conference. So I have been to many, many, many conferences, but I was always working. I was either, doing booth duty or presenting or whatever, but I've never actually attended a conference before. So it was pretty cool experience to be able to go to the past summit. Excuse me. What I really liked is just everyone in the data community. So I came from the software development industry. I was there for about 25 years. And the data community is so different than the software development community. It's like a fun club. Everybody knows everybody, and people have known. I saw a slide that said, when did you start using SQL? And honestly, the community is been around for a long time, and if you look at the numbers of the growth is actually slowing. And I was looking at this slide, and it's like, how many of you used, SQL 2005, I think it said, or something like that, and it was, like 85%. And then with each subsequent year, it gets less and less and less. And I was sort of looking at that going, we need to, as a data community, like grow this space because it's so cool and it's so fun. And I really love the people the most. Like, they're just such a friendly group of people, and they will, man, and they're so passionate. Like, if I say the words, I'm going to say these words. So Dan, don't do it. But if I say query tuning, you're like, Dan can talk for days. And actually, any of the DBAs at the summit, it was hilarious. You should have seen them, all of them. They would I thought Dan was, Dan is very special. He's very amazing. But man, this is a hugely passionate topic, this query tuning thing that I've been learning about. So yeah, I if you haven't ever had the opportunity to attend PASS, I really, really recommend it. Like, I only actually got to attend one pre-con and one day at the summit. And so hopefully next year I'll be able to do the whole thing, because there was so much more content that I'm interested in. And actually the sessions were super enlightening for me. And I've only been, looking at data, as Randy said. I just finished my data development SQL certification. And I've only really been digging into data itself for like a year. And so even for me as a pretty newbie in this space, wow, every session I went to, I was like, okay, this is great. This is helpful.
All right, thanks, Heather. Also, I neglected at the beginning to have Rich Benner introduce himself. Rich is there kind of in the center. He actually wasn't with us at Summit because he's a new member of the team. But we wanted in the webinar for him to have the opportunity to introduce himself, and we're excited to have him. So Rich, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Hi. Yeah, I'm Rich. I'm based in the UK. I've been in databases for 15 years or so now, through production development, a lot of query tuning, funnily enough. Yeah, happy to be part of the team and helping you guys out. Absolutely.
All right, thanks. So let's go to another veteran next. Scott has been doing this about as long as I have, I think. So a lot of years at Microsoft and now with us for a few years. So Scott, why don't you kind of talk to us about your experience?
Yeah, I won't talk techie yet because I'm sure we still have plenty of time to talk about that. I will talk about the overall experience because, like Randy said, it was nice to get back to an in-person conference. It was interesting in that aspect because when you talk to people, there was that, I don't know how you call it. Everybody was there was excited. Everybody that was there in person was excited to be there in person. And it was just great to see those 1,500 people. And I think, like Heather said, it was that, that you call it, the community. And it's, there's the hashtag SQL family, because that's what it is. Everybody's, they're happy to be there and everybody knows everybody. But you could still see a little bit of the apprehension going, hey, am I still going to be okay? Okay. But it was really good to get back and in person and network and socialize and meet people and see people that you haven't seen in, at least over 3 or 4 years. and how you doing, and you can talk to them over email all you want, but there's just that in-person socializing, networking aspect that you can't get anywhere else. And so to be able to talk, to meet them, and I also attended a pre-con, and that was awesome. That's the first pre-con I've ever attended, but I've been to PASS, oh my goodness, probably good 10 times, or but that's my first pre-con, and that was awesome. And then spent all 3 days at the PASS. So it was super good to be there in person and to see people you haven't seen for in ages, and kind of rekindle and reestablish that friendship and talking. So it was good to be back. It would have been awesome to see more people there, but I think given the situation, it was I think 1,500 people was a great number, right? So I'll talk about the sessions later that I went to, but I think that was awesome. It was good to be in person.
All right. And Dan's kind of our he's not quite as gray whiskered as Scott and I, but has been involved in the community for several years now, and so kind of in between Heather and Scott and I. So Dan, your perspective.
Yeah, it was really good. It was also being able to be a presenter was very enjoyable. Being able to go over a topic, and anytime I build a session for being able to speak at a conference, it's always like I learn 10 times more about it just being able to do that. So it was really enjoyable picking something that not only can help the community, but could help help me in my day-to-day as I continue to work on this thing called SQL Server. But I want to touch on what Randy and Scott and Heather have definitely said, is that being in person was really a great part of it, but also with a lot of the people who did attend online, that was really enjoyable to be able to have people being able to attend at that point, being able to ask questions, go to the Q&As. I helped moderate several sessions, and the engagement from people online was also really enjoyable. So if you're not able to attend online, but they continue to do the hybrid, then you can still get a lot out of these events, and get into some of the chat rooms and such, which are still going on. So a lot of the chats are still happening, and the Discord and Slack, and be able to engage in the community that way as well. But yeah, it was definitely enjoyable being in person. I don't know when I'll be able to do it again soon, but with stuff going on in my life. But man, it was great being able to see people in person again, and get all those photos with everybody.
Yeah, the other thing that I would mention, just for us as a company, it was great. We're a virtual company, right? The way you see us here is the way we interact with each other for the most part, because we're all over the US and now the world, right? Rich is in the UK, Dan's in Kansas, Scott's in Colorado, Heather's in Eastern Washington, I'm in Western Washington, right? So it's always a good thing just for our team to be together at an event and hang out and go to dinner. And so it highly encourage, if you have the opportunity to go to one of these events in person, they're awesome, right? If not here, if you're in Europe, SQL Bits is a great conference that's over there. It's just like Heather said, it's a community like no other. They use the hashtag SQL family, and it sounds trite, but it's kind of true, right? Mm-hmm. And compared to any other technology community I'm involved in, it's just different, right? It doesn't, everybody is down to earth, everybody's approachable. You look at people like, Paul Randall, right, who's at the top of this, wrote DBCC back in the day, right? And just as down to earth and approachable, and you walk up to him and introduce yourself. It's just there are no, very, very few. There are some in every community, right? But not a lot of prima donnas, not a lot of arrogance, or you're new, I'm not going to talk to you. It's just it's a really neat community. All right,
Yeah,
well, let's get to the part where that people are probably more interested in, which is content. And so to start, I'll kick this off. You know, SQL Server 2022, obviously a huge focus. A lot of things we're excited about. The day one keynote, of course, was you know, Rohan Kumar, who's the I don't know what his title is, but he's over all of data basically at Microsoft. And you know, fantastic keynote. Announced SQL Server 2022 general availability by taking his shirt off, and he had the SQL Server 2022 t-shirt, and we all were able to get one of those t-shirts at the Microsoft booth. So really cool. Went through a lot of functionality of new stuff. Now, I sit there, I've been in this business for a long time, and I recognize that, you know, 80% plus of our customer base is still mostly on premise, right? On premises. But, you know, Microsoft's all about Azure, right? So when they do these keynotes and when they promote SQL Server 2022, you know, it's definitely weighted towards hybrid stuff and Azure stuff, which there's some really cool stuff, you know, being able to use a managed instance as an AG replica, being able to fail over back and forth to a managed instance is huge, right? And so I am not discounting that at all. But of course, there's a lot of things about SQL Server 2022 we're equally excited about that have nothing to do with Azure, right? And they did touch on some of those things. You know, I think probably the biggest game-changing piece, and we'll see how well it works at the V1, is parameter sensitive plans, right? Where, you know, in our 2022 webinar we did a couple months ago, we talked about that a little bit, where, you know, we're going to be able to have, you know, it should help the parameter sniffing problem, right? I think, you know, from coming back to query tuning, performance tuning, right? You know, parameter sniffing, and by the way, I find parameter sensitive plans to be a hugely better term than parameter sniffing, right? Because what we call the parameter sniffing problem is really the results of parameter sniffing. Parameter sniffing is not bad, right?
Right.
But you know, anyway, I think that's going to have a huge impact. The other thing in that keynote that I noticed was Bob Ward, of course, and Connor, and I never remember Connor's last name. I guess that's what happens when you're
Cunningham.
Cunningham, thank you. I guess that's, you know, when you're the sidekick for Bob Ward, no one remembers you, right? But Connor's great too. But, you know, they showed some cool stuff. And one of the things they showed was actually a v.next or maybe a service pack or something. They showed something with transactions where they were able to have, like, you know, a writer blocking, you know, a huge set of data and still be able to go set a nice, I don't remember the details. Dan, you may remember better than I do, but
yeah,
but
the exact lock.
Yeah,
oh gosh,
and the lock type was like exact, something we'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a wow moment. We'll see where we'll see what happens with that. But that was that was a really cool thing. So yeah, so that was the day one keynote. Day two was Redgate, and they did a really good job, I think. You know, it was interesting. Redgate, you know, purchased the assets of Pass, and so they ran the conference. I thought it was awesome that they chose to keep the name Pass Data Community Summit, right? Because for continuity and really, as involved as Redgate was, I didn't feel like I was going to a vendor conference. It felt like Pass, right? Maybe the only thing of note to me was that some of the other tools vendors that are normally there exhibiting, speaking, things like that, were either completely not present or very limited. And I suspect, you know, they probably view it as a competitors conference or something like that. I don't know. And so that was a little different, but overall, it was also really cool to see people that I've known for years. You know, Steve Jones, of course, and Kathy Kellenberger. I've known both of them for a long time, up there doing a keynote, right? It was really neat. And then, of course, day three, Kimberly Tripp took us kind of on that walk down memory lane. I wish I was the pack rat that she is, because, you know, a lot of that stuff that she showed, I've owned at different times, right? I also thought it was funny. She did a survey and she mentioned that, you know, something like 70%, 80%, something like that, started with SQL Server on 6.5, version 6.5, and that's me. I'm right in that group. So, and I think Scott said that was him too. So,
yeah,
you know,
6.0.
Yep. So very close. So, yeah. So I'll jump into sessions next, but just wanted to kind of go through the group, Heather and Dan and Scott, and the keynotes 2022. Just kind of your takeaways. We'll start with Heather.
Well, my takeaway was there's a lot of information, and I did my best to write as fast as I could, half of which I had no idea what it meant. And I have like little question marks to go look it up, because I'm like, I do not know what they're saying right now. But I focused, you know, when we get to sessions, I'll talk a little bit more about what I focused on and how I structured my past experience as being a brand new person in the space, because I was pretty purposeful about what I did. So
Yeah, if you're new to the industry or a first timer, one of the things I always tell people, you know, you go to these things and you're like, I got to learn it all, and you can't, right? You just have to pick and choose. And, you know, talking to people, the networking, things like that is I think just as valuable as the content, particularly considering you can get the extended pass for the content, and a lot of them, you know, you can see later. So great.
yeah,
Dan? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Heather.
Oh, I was just going to say, I attended a luncheon, and it was about, you know, how do you continue your career and, you know, all this stuff. And it was during that luncheon that I literally was thinking to myself, so this is a second career for me. And I thought to myself, after everybody's like, okay, so you need to network and you need to read these books and I was like, what am I thinking? Why did I think this was a good idea? And after that, you know, and after that, I saw Randy, and Randy's like, it's all right. Like, you're fine. You don't have to learn everything right now. But, you know, it was the passion of those speakers at that luncheon. It was just like, you know, when I was, 23, this was easy. Now I'm like,
Well, that was an interesting. I'm glad you bring that up. That was an interesting part of Kimberly Tripp's keynote. Was, you know, because really what the keynote was about was, you know, how do we move forward in this, you know, how things have changed, and just talking about, you know, the scope of what encompasses the Microsoft data platform today versus 20 years ago, right? It's mind-boggling, right? And the industry at large, right? It's, you know, I've said for years, the easier we make technology for end users, the more complex we make it for us.
Yep.
And we're seeing that, right? You know, it started with, you know, just end-tier applications, right? You know, that we were no longer going to be client server. We were going to have an app server. And now we have microservices architectures and cloud and multi-cloud and hybrid. And I mean, it's and that's even more so than when I started, Heather. That's why you have to focus and you have to recognize that this is what I care about today. So great feedback.
Yeah, and they actually, in one of the talks I went to, there were a lot of concerns from DBAs because they're now having to become sysadmins, and you should have heard, it was hilarious. So they're like, I didn't go in to be a sysadmin on purpose. I hate that stuff. And so they were like, great, now I have to go do this thing that I don't even want to do just because of how the, you know, industry is changing.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot as a business, right? You know, that in the 12 years, you know, when I started this company, most of my customers had DBAs, and we were there doing projects. We were assisting their DBAs. We were training their DBAs, coaching, mentoring, whatever. Now I would say most of our customers do not have DBAs, right? They have full stack developers, they have sysadmins, they have SREs that are being asked to do all this. So that's the flip side of that, right? And I think that's probably why you're seeing kind of that drop off in how many people started in, you know, 2012, 2016, 2019, because there's, you know, it's interesting to see how the industry has changed that way. So, Dan?
Yeah. So some of the stuff that I was able to really enjoy, with some of the technology stuff that I'm excited about. Obviously, Randy, you mentioned the parameter sensitive plan, which I don't know. I'm not the biggest keen on that being a name, but we can disagree on that. The exact lock stuff was really great. I was able to catch a conversation with Paul and Mr. Cunningham in regards to just some of that, and he's like, I can't tell you, and he's like, please tell me. It's like, I can't tell you. And he's like, is it this? He's like, I can't tell you. It was really enjoyable that they're looking at those areas. I also am really excited about the containerized availability groups in 2022. I didn't hear. Okay. Well, they didn't mention it a lot, so I do hope everything still stays in it and everything's still good with it. That I'm excited about, and then also the parallel buffer reading, buffer pool reading. That's a big one. And then I know I even have clients. We work on clients now that being able to have query store on read replicas. Mm-hmm. That's going to be really huge. So those were the tech things that I was really excited about. In regards to kind of dovetailing on what you had said, Heather, of it feels like we have to be a sysadmin. Yeah, some of our stuff is changing, but I think it's that it's changing in a really good way, that DBAs are now being part of this whole deployment thing. We're being a part of the DevOps. It's not like, okay, SQL people, we're going to handle all of your stuff and we're going to do this and you just have to deal with it. It's like, no. Why don't you join us as we do this? And so that's a really big part that I'm enjoying, being able to learn more about the infrastructure, learning more about what's going on, and all of that. Let me see.
So
a couple questions.
So Dan, there was a question there. Your topic, given how important performance tuning is, particularly in cloud environments. Wait, no, that's not the one. Where's the DBA? There was a DBA question. Where'd that DBA question?
DBA showing up more over time.
Absolutely, I do, because an example I have is a couple years back I was working for a client. And they were Azure, and everything was great. And there's Azure's doing stuff, and then oh my gosh, compute's going up. We can just scale up, and we can just turn this knob. And I come in and I look at it and I go, well, how much are you spending on Azure? And they were spending almost I think like $80,000 a month. It was a big environment. And I was like, well, how about I just tune some of your queries? Because you've got indexing that's needed. You've got some poorly written stuff. Let's rewrite it. And within 3 months, we were able to drop the Azure spend to like $30,000 a month. So just a huge savings across the company. So even with those cloud environments, yes, they will be happy to give you all the compute you need, but a DBA can absolutely save so much money in any environment. So I don't think that the DBA job is in any way going away. I do think it's slightly changing, but as much as any of these environments, whether it's AWS, Google, Azure, are trying to do away with the DBA, it's really just making it so that we are needed to save money. Mm-hmm. And we can just show that cost savings. Just like
that brings up an excellent point. We're seeing a lot of that with our customers, right? That when you're dealing with on-premises hardware that you do, $1 million of CapEx every year to refresh or whatever, it's really easy to throw hardware at the problem, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're in the cloud, throwing hardware at the problem costs you money every month, and it's very clear, right? Mm-hmm. We have customers who've come to us because they're like, look, we just keep scaling up our Azure. We're on the highest tier of business critical, and we know it's our queries, and going down that path. So that is an excellent point. Mm-hmm. I think what I see in the industry on that question, and we'll get to you in a minute, Scott, on that topic. But since we covered that question, there's a lot of cloud fear out there, I think, among people, not just DBAs, but actually more not DBAs, sysadmins, infrastructure people, whatever. that, you know, when the company says we're going to the cloud or we're going hybrid, there's pushback. There's a lot of reasons why we can't do it. And I just look at it as, you know, I've been in this industry for almost 30 years now, right? And the technology that I knew and that I learned back then is almost irrelevant. You know, database normalization, sure, right? You know, but basic computer science stuff, right? And it's just part of the progression, right? And I look at it as how exciting to be able to learn a bunch of new technology and new ways of doing the same things. You know, unless you're a sysadmin who just loves racking hardware, which I don't know any that's their favorite part of their job. You know, now I just get to focus on configuring the network, configuring monitoring, configuring security, right, with a whole new set of tools. So, but that's an excellent insight, Dan, that we're probably going to see more people willing to spend money on DBAs and particularly tuning because of that. So, great.
I did want to just answer another question that we saw come in. It looks like Tom said, I get the parameter sensitive plan improvement, but can you explain further the locking blocking improvement you mentioned? So it was something that was shown in a day one keynote, and it was said that it's coming and they're working on it. And long story short, it was an example of a specific lock. He was using the DMV sysdm tran locks to show, hey, I'm doing this thing and I have 50,000 locks on all of these different pages and such, and it's just taking all of this time to hold on to it. Well, I'm going to now turn this feature on this special thing, which is not public yet. And he did the exact same code, and it had one line in sysdm tran locks, and it was called this new lock type. I think it was like exact tran or something like that, or something similar to that, exact something. And so we don't know a lot about it, but again, a much better way for handling certain locking. So we don't have all that information, but stay tuned as we hear that. That'll probably definitely be on a future webinar.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hesitated to even mention that because it was just kind of like this oh wow thing, but I thought it was cool enough to bring up. So thanks for that. Scott, did you want to kind of take your turn on the initial technology?
Yeah, so
I
want to take a minute first, because I remember when I first started at Microsoft, when Azure was first out, the biggest, we'd go to these conferences, and the biggest fear amongst DBAs is my job going away? That was the biggest fear. And we actually at Tech Eds, at all the Tech Eds, and this was pre-Ignite, so at all the Tech Eds, we actually had this session called Azure for the DBA, right? Because, and what we would do is we would spend an hour talking about that, like exactly what Dan was talking about, right? How your job is still needed, but it may change just a little bit, but your job's, the role of a DBA isn't going away. So that was really interesting. So, I will wholeheartedly, second and third what Dan was saying is that, there's still absolutely a need for a DBA. It may be changed a bit in a lot of areas, but your DBA is still needed. As far as the keynote goes, and some of the tech, again, the SQL 22, when I started at Microsoft, I was hired because of the Azure stuff, right? And so I'm a SQL guy, but I also love Azure. And so for me, one of the key things is there was that link feature for Azure SQL Managed Instance. People may gloss over that, but I actually think that considering that where the price point is for managed instance now, and it's continuing to come down, I think this is a huge deal, and I think people gloss over this. But I think it's a huge deal, especially just given a lot of the Azure features, because there's the Azure Synapse link for SQL Server, Azure Purview, and I'm not going to get into Azure Purview, but I still think a lot of these built-in Azure features for SQL Server should not be glossed over. I think they should be looked at because of the ability for disaster recovery and high availability scenarios, right? I could pay a lot of money on prem, right? But I think just the ability to be able to scale up in a managed instance, scale back down, things like that, huge, right? So I think there's great areas there. Same thing, a parameter sensitive plan optimization. I love the query store changes and the query processing changes they're adding. Great stuff, but I will always be a fan of some of these Azure features that they add, and they should be looked at, right?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think we're seeing and we're going to see, and maybe we'll do a webinar on this at some point, is that with SQL Server on-premises in particular, hybrid is going to become really big, I think, as a way to enhance your on-premises environment.
I was just going to say that, right?
The things like, Scott brought up Azure Purview, which is basically data classification and governance, right?
Yep.
And, being able to have that plugged into your on-premises environment. Things like Microsoft Defender for SQL, right? For, for zero threat model, kinds of stuff that I can use in my on-premises environment. Using Azure Arc, right? So that my on-premises servers are represented in the cloud, and a lot of these services in the cloud I can take advantage of, right? So, if I'm a small company and I don't have, WSUS or something for patch orchestration, I can have Azure manage patching of my on-premises servers, right? And so I think that's going to be a big topic in hybrid, right? Is just, what are some Azure services that we can use to make our on-premises life better? So,
and that was my point. I think is we need to, not just SSG. I mean, everybody needs to start getting on the hybrid bandwagon, right? And start looking at that. Big time.
Another thing I'll say, 2022 wise, that it's just like one of those oh by the way things, but I think is pretty cool. Backups to S3. Right.
Oh, yeah.
We've been able to back up directly to Azure Blob Storage for quite some time now. Like 2016, I think that came out in. But being able to back up the native SQL Server backup directly to S3, that's important for two reasons. A, there's a lot of AWS shops running SQL Server, IaaS, but also the S3 protocol is open, right? So you've got companies like Wasabi. That does manage backups that, they have S3 compatible object storage, right? So you could back up your databases directly there. So I think for, object storage, and it was one of those things that's just kind of, oh, by the way, we're supporting this now. And it's like, wow, that's really cool. That's
kind of a flyby, a drive-by comment that they like, wait.
Yeah, because I mean, we have customers on 2019 on EC2. That, we have to do, we do native backups to expensive storage and then have to, copy it to blob storage and delete it from the expensive storage, right? So it's that's a good one too. So all right, let's continue our roundtable, Heather. Let's move on to kind of breakout sessions and things. Beyond the keynotes, just tell us some of the things that you attended and some of your key takeaways.
Yeah, so like I said, I was pretty purposeful in what I decided to do. And one of the things I decided to do was attend Itzik Ben-Ghan's talks. And people thought I was insane. But it was on purpose because I am just learning T-SQL. And the thing that I have learned the most from both Itzik and other people I talked to is if you don't understand how the SQL engine works, you cannot make your SQL perform correctly because it does some very creative things. Like, for example, I went to a session called Beware Non-Deterministic T-SQL. And I was like, that was, Itzik. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. And I go there. Well, what it means is you can write T-SQL code that does something different every time you run it. Well, what? And so if you don't understand what the engine is doing, and so I spent a whole entire day at a pre-con with Itzik learning about T-SQL and how, and actually he was really like, you need to come up with a strategy for how you're going to learn this thing. Like, learn come up with your learning strategy, so then you can actually get to the point where you can write performant queries. You know, he also made all of us raise our right hand and swear that we would put semicolons at the end of each statement. So he would not tell us anything unless we said that. So now I'm very, very careful about my semicolons because I promised ITSEC I would do that. So those were really, really cool talks. Yeah, it was hard. It was a lot though. But it was, man, I learned so much. And then the other session that I went to was just a session on Azure migration. And it was really cool because she walked through, Melody walked through the tools. They introduced some new tools and then just how to use each of them effectively. So for example, she said, you know, run the experimentation assistant first, you know, with your workload, so you can actually see what's going on, because that way you'll be able to better, you know, have your stuff set up to be able to migrate it. Now, I'm not to the point where I'm doing this yet. I have done a little bit here with a lot of I call it I get grown-up supervision. I often will message my team and say, I need a grown-up, please. But, you know, it was a pretty cool, you know, talk, and she talked through these different migration tools and how, you know, the best way to use them to successfully migrate to Azure. So that was a pretty fun one too.
Yeah, you brought up ITSEC, and people say that ITSEC is probably one of the smartest people I know, if not the smartest, right? Like, I mean, just some of the stuff that he comes up with. But the other thing is, ITSEC is an awesome trainer. Right. So even if you're brand new to T-SQL, you know, again, we have these people in this industry that are just, you know, giants and totally approachable, totally, you know, so yeah, it's like, if you have not read any of his books or articles or seen any of his stuff, when it comes to T-SQL and, you know, how the engine works and things like that, that's, you know, that's your number one, in my opinion. The other thing that I just wanted to, occurred to me before we move on to the next person, the DBA question. One of the things, and what made me think of this is one of them just popped up with a comment. One of the things we do at SSG is we create DBAs, right? We have a coaching program that, you know, we have customers that we've done consulting work for, managed services, things like that. And there's, you know, a person or persons there who are the accidental DBA, right? Who really want to do that. And we do coaching, you know, over a period of time, you know, several months usually, where we're, you know, not necessarily, it's not training in that we're not, you know, we're saying, hey, read this book or watch this video, but then we're looking at their environment and we're doing DBA stuff in their environment with them. And, you know, we've had some real success stories with a couple of our customers that, you know, have moved on from needing us to do everything to, you know, just, you know, sending us an execution plan and saying, hey, I'm looking at this and here's, you know, these things, and can you help me with this thing, right? So, you know, there's definitely that role there. I think at every company internally, some portion of the DBA role is being fulfilled, whether they have that title or not, right? And so looking at ways to grow that capability is a huge thing too. So, all right, Dan.
So one of the pre-cons I went to was I was helping moderate for Brent Ozar for his mastering parameter sniffing. And that was really a good session to be able to help out with. The session was all about, you know, it was really kind of a 1 day of his normal 3-day pre-con or, you know, class of mastering parameter sniffing. So it was also really good because he actually then gave everybody in the class the access to his full 3-day master parameter sniffing. It was really enjoyable to kind of just see lots of different ways of handling parameter sniffing, but also that, you know, having access to it, you know, and the different training he did for it, because, you know, sometimes with parameter sniffing, you're like, okay, well, I may not be able to fully handle everything right now or be able to absorb it all, but man, when I get into a parameter, you know, sniffing issue, then wow, I can review those notes and everything. So that was really good. And then another session that really was helpful was Ben DeBoe's session on when it's not SQL Server. And he talked on, what are some ways that you can look at from your DBA pane, some of the tools of using perfmon counters and stuff for finding out whether it's IO, whether it's network, whether it's, these different areas, whether it's the VM, things to look at if you have access to the VMware vSphere, panel or different areas to see, like, is it not just SQL Server, and how can we do that? Again, that touches base that, yeah, our role is kind of changing, but that's okay.
All right, Scott.
I was just going through. I had to log into Pass to figure out I can't remember what sessions I went to. I mean, I attended like a lot of the 2022 sessions, obviously. My frustration with Pass was that you had a lot of good sessions at the same time, and Heather was saying that too.
Always, yeah.
And you're like, okay, crap. What do I go to? So I'm gonna pony up the money to get the recordings, but the one that a couple come to mind. The very last one of the conference was Friday evening, was Paul Randall and Kimberly Tripp, called Performance Mythbusters. And the way they do that, they just go, it was basically 20 some slides of, he'd ask a question, he'd say, he'd give you a statement and you'd have to, is it true or false? And, that was fun because you would have a lot of people going true, no false, no true, no false, right? And you had this, it was like watching a Yankees Blue Sox game, right? He just, having this people yell at each other, and then he'd go, well, it's either true or false, and he'd explain why. And that was a lot of fun. Standing room only, obviously, because it's Paul Randall and Kimberly Tripp, but that was interesting. The other one that I went to was, again, just being an Azure guy, modernize SQL managed instance for hybrid cloud with Azure Arc. And, I bring that up because we were just talking about this in the hybrid thing. This is going to pick up. And I love the fact how they walk through just the single pane of glass scenario of, managing your on-prem, your entire data estate, including SQL managed instance, but your entire data estate through the portal. And this is the way things are going. This is going to be and will continue to be a big thing. An off one I went to was I just wanted to go, hey, so I went to one called Introduction to Partitioning, and that was done by a good friend of mine from Germany. And I thought I knew partitioning somewhat, but man, he just opened that up, and that was really, 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 really good. Uwe Ricken is his name, and if you haven't seen that, that was a really good session. So there was, I really liked these sessions in terms of, if there was an Azure one that had to do with data, I was in it, right? And so this whole hybrid thing, I think, is a topic that people need to start, need to pay attention to, as well as, just this whole data estate topic is a good one. So those are the kind of the ones. I went to a lot more, but SQL 22, if there's one on SQL 22, I went to one with Bob Ward. And obviously that was standing room only. And, if you got the slides, the cool thing about that, I will say, is at the end of every single one of Bob Ward's sessions, he has a slide that says, here's every demo of 2022 and just all the content that they, and all the workshops and demos and things like that they do in all of their day-long work. They put them out there. So there's no reason you can't get hands-on for SQL 2022. Man, it's out there. Just look for Google Bob Ward's workshop, stuff. It's out there. It's free. So there's no reason we can't, people can't be playing with it. So, that's my take.
I went to a few sessions. Dan spoke at PASS, as did I. One of the things that was interesting to me, I had two sessions. I had learning pathway. Dan and I both spoke in the same learning pathway, which was the security and governance. And those were pre-recorded, right? So those were the ones that, you know, we had to have them uploaded. I think it was like by October 31st or something like that. And it was opened up to you to review ahead of the conference. And then there was an online Q&A session during the conference. And that was the first time I've done one that way, you know, where I was at a conference, but not a live speaking slot. And I really enjoyed that. Because, you know, for bigger conferences like this, you know, speaking and being prepared and then energy and everything else can be a little bit stressful, right? And so in the past, it was always, you know, okay, once I get past my session, I can enjoy the conference, right? A little bit. And so that was good, but I really enjoyed the Q&A session. Like Dan mentioned that, I think that the hybrid, it was really cool to, you know, to be able to engage with people who weren't there in person. And then the other one was a lightning talk, and the lightning talk sessions are really fun. They did an online one, by the way, if you attended online. It's 6 10-minute talks basically in one session. And it's a challenge to get a topic across, have a demo
10 minutes.
in 10 minutes, you know, but they're always fun because they really mix it up, right? So in my lightning talk session, there was a couple of professional development. Mine was security related. There was one that was like related to Synapse, right? Like it's just kind of across the board. And then, you know, kind of like the others, always try to make it to Bob Ward sessions because, you know, they're kind of the, if ITSEC is the melt your brain for T-SQL, Bob is the melt your brain for internals, right? And those are all really cool. You know, when he pulls out the debugger for SQL Server, you know you're going to have a good time. Based upon my definition of a good time, which probably is not a popular one, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So we're almost out of time. Want to make sure that we pick up all the questions. Tim mentioned the WIT luncheon. Women in Technology, always cool. I didn't make it to the one this year, but I usually try to. I actually was on a WIT panel at a SQL Saturday years ago. They were looking for another person and they came in the speaker room and someone else in there was like, well, Randy has tons of daughters. And so she's like, well, come on and be on the panel. And that was interesting to, you know, that perspective, right? So I love how PASS has always been and continues to be really focused on things like that. You know, there were several sessions on, you know, diversity and inclusion, right? And really, and I think it's that community thing, right? That we want everybody to be comfortable, right? Fantastic conference. You know, we could go on, you know, probably for hours talking about the different things, but let's just open it up for any more questions. And then while we're doing that, I'll just give each of you a moment to just kind of wrap up and we'll call it good. So let's start with Heather.
I think that one thing that was super interesting to me and that I'm actually seeing with one of my customers is that that we were talking about query tuning and how, you know, just saving money, right? And so I have this customer that had to apply like 12 cores because it was so slow. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to go get Dan and we're going to tune these queries up. And what they did was their developer is like re-architecting their stuff and I'm scared now. And so what I noticed in the talk, you know, I think there's an interesting thing in this space about the DBA role and people understanding all the different roles in this data space that I learned a lot about, like just developers understanding what DBAs do and, you know, getting them to work together to use their superpowers effectively is how I kind of look at it. And I think I'm seeing that in my job now where I'm like, oh no, this is not how we want to use our superpowers. And so, yeah, I thought that was a super interesting takeaway that I had from the conference.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Dan?
Yeah, thinking about just, again, my biggest takeaway of what's going on is being excited for 2022, being excited for the stuff that's coming out, being able to, you know, have your managed instance in Azure, you know, have your managed instance in your AG and not, and, you know, restore back and forth. I mean, those are incredibly exciting. But also to say that a lot of these things aren't because Microsoft decides them. I mean, some of them are, but as we are in this community, if there are ideas that are out there, there is a whole area for, you know, voting up Connect tickets or whatever it is now, but you can vote on it and see about having what we want to impact this community to become better. And so I know recently, what was it, trace flag 3226 or something? Somebody recently was saying, hey, let's just make that the default. You know, let's stop, you know, filling up our error log with, you know, transaction log complete, you know, or any of our backup completes. You know, let's make that default and let's go vote on it. And if enough of us go and vote on it, then Microsoft can change that. They'll recognize this is a benefit to the community. And so just don't ask for dark mode in Management Studio. They've just said that will never happen. So that's about the only one.
What we need is an RCSI default that we can.
It is. It is. It's an Azure SQL database, and they put it on default there.
Yep, I know. Like I just, we had a good internal conversation about isolation levels. It was very database geeky the other day, but it really was, you know, I've said that for quite some time now that, you know, RCSI should be the default isolation level.
Yes.
It would solve so many problems for so many people.
Yes.
You wouldn't believe how many customers we have that we get in and we look at their environment, and turning on RCSI fixes everything that they were having problems with.
Yeah.
Because it was concurrency related. So, all right, Scott.
Let's see, closing thoughts. You know, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna say I look forward to next year. You know, because there's just so much stuff out there, and it's like, okay, where do you want to focus, and where's your passion? But you know, it's like I think Heather was saying, there's just so much stuff. You gotta pick and choose, and I just look forward to going next year and seeing what's, you know, and playing with 2022, and you know, there's just, you know,
Yep.
so much good. You know, how do you close it out? There's so much good stuff, and just get your hands on 2022. And
yeah. On that note, as always, we really love suggestions for webinar topics.
Yep.
Things that you're dealing with, you know, because you know, we try to focus on things our customers are dealing with, but sometimes, you know, we get into things that are like, wow, this is cool, but we're not going to use this for 5 years, right? You know, so always interested in that. And then of course I'll turn the time back over to Jason for the drawing for the pie from Harry and David. And thank you everyone for attending. Always, you know, feel free to reach out. We want to be as approachable as these people that we look up to. Right. And so don't ever hesitate to, you know, email, Twitter, whatever. Always interested in hearing from our customers and just the community at large. So Jason, do you want to go ahead and run this drawing, and let's give away a pie?
Yep, absolutely. So using a random number generator here, our winner of the pie is Rob Kraft. Rob, are you with us?
He's in Kansas City. Maybe he can share it with me.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Dang it. Dan did that on purpose.
Hey,
Was that number generator provided by Dan?
Yeah, Dan did that on purpose.
You know.
All right, next time you're picking someone in Colorado.
The results were audited by Dan Manley and Associates. Oh, wait a minute.
No. I have random number generators right here, and you can. I have all my dice. I've got all my dice. Those are my number generators.
So, all right. Everyone have a great week. Thanks for attending, and we look forward to lots of SQL Server 2022 in the upcoming year and years. So have a good one.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody.